chosen.
See, I think the way you do that is to address as a societal need with input from some way of saying input from government, commercial, and NGOs and private citizens.
Well, let's put this another way. Everything else has some objective measurement, right?
Okay.
Price or ISP or whatever, right? And usefulness, to say usefulness completely begs the question of for whom and by what standard.
Right. The utility function
right.
of
so
these vehicles.
Shall we come back to that? Because I made a note.
Yeah, let's come back.
Third, the development and operation of vehicles capable of carrying instruments, equipment, supplies, and living organisms through space.
Read the first few sentences again.
Development and operation of vehicles carrying blah, blah, blah.
See, I think development should be in there in the sense of, this is one of those things of like, how, some way, because this is the thing, like, I don't see a realistic, a viable private sector role for doing beyond Earth orbit situations, and here you want, that's someplace where you actively would want, if you take the viewpoint of we should be doing something in beyond LEO right now.
So you're saying make it beyond LEO?
Well, but again, let's get back to the distinction that I was making earlier. There's development, there's operation, and there's funding. So what you're saying is, might be true of funding, but it's not necessarily true of development or operation. You could easily imagine government funding a mission that was developed by someone else, operated by someone else, that was, pick your favorite deep space destination.
I think even there's got to be a way, and this would be the one I would think to do it under. There's got to be a way whereby you position NASA as the trailblazer, and have a transition and a mechanism that encourages transition to commercialization.
Okay, but when you say as the trailblazer, you mean in development and operation?
Yeah.
But I'm not sure why you assume that has to be true.
I think there are areas where I don't think that we can presuppose that people won't try some crazy things, but I also think that there are areas where you won't necessarily see people pursue it. But yet I would argue that there are examples of areas where it would be worth pursuing.
Yeah, but again, so let's concede that point. That means the government should fund those things. It doesn't necessarily mean the government should develop or operate those systems. All I'm getting at here, I mean, you said it best earlier, that the whole point here is for this to be a flexible framework. And to specify...
Right, I'm doing it. Okay.
So we're going through the NASA,
actually right here would be
purposes.
We're trying to make sure you're on camera properly.
You are. He is.
So we're on NASA purpose statement from the NASA Act. We're on statement number 3 of 9, I believe. And if you just pull up the NASA Act, you'll see these, or I can just tweet about it again if that's helpful. Because I think it is helpful for people to have this in front of them.
They're being tweeted?
Hold on.
I might be able to get onto the web page.
I haven't actually looked
Oh, there it is. On the Liberation, or techliberation.com?
No, that's something else.
Okay.
Hold on.
Maybe they're talking about this.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, I just tweeted it. Anyway, so we're on the third one. I'm doing a markup as we go. The third one is the development and operation of vehicles capable of carrying instruments, equipment, supplies, and living organisms through space. And we were having a conversation about whether we really need to specify that NASA's purpose is to develop and operate vehicles. Because I actually would suggest that that the most fundamental purpose is not to develop or operate, but to fund. And maybe there might be circumstances where it's appropriate for NASA to develop and operate, but to specify that as their purpose with nothing else is to say that NASA should be developing and operating all those vehicles.
Well, maybe the way to do it is this: the funding and possible development and possible operations. because that presupposes that I mean, we are assuming they're going to fund it. So, but that doesn't presuppose that the only mechanism of operation is a NASA wholly owned option. There may be other there may be another way, and that that would tie into later parts in the NASA Act about, because I know, if I remember, there's something in there about commercialization.
So how about the funding and, where appropriate, the development of and operation of? I can zoom in and make this. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yep.
The funding and where.
I mean, something like that.
Yeah, I think, some indication that it's not a permanent function, an initial,
Right.
necessary.
Now, of course, the where appropriate begs the
Right,
question of how that's to be determined, but
As a broad base,
right, because we can all agree on that, right?
yeah.
And this is kind of what I'm looking for here, right?
Right.
We'll have different perspectives on these things. Now, the other thing that's missing here is this carrying things through space. Well, what about, permanent facilities? I mean,
Well, you could argue though that even if it's a permanent facility, it's still going through space just indefinitely.
well, so are we.
I know.
I mean, right? But well, does a moon base qualify?
I would argue.
It qualifies just as much as this building does.
I have no
or-
problem with it. I have no problem with it.
How about
Adding permanent destinations in space or permanent facilities in space. We need to set up right there. If you can pull up a chair right between Baron and Aaron, then you'll be on camera.
I don't.
We're producing.
You're
Show.
producing. You're producing and directing?
Directing
I'll try to
the show.
walk through.
singer, songwriter, producer, director, best boy, grip, candidate?
I'm all of it. Okay, right between here and another. You have to sit in a specific spot because we're on the show. We're trying to make it a good show.
But you two shouldn't sit next to each other because you're both wearing horizontal stripes.
Yeah,
And-
no, come on in. Come on in.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Next to that, sure. Well, you gotta be facing the camera.
Oh, right, okay.
Come and face the camera. We're rewriting NASA's authorization bill. So
Well, the NASA Act.
NASA Act, yeah, which is there up. Okay, we're kind of
Following the rules, we're not sitting next to it.
knock
And
yourself.
could we all turn off our tribbles,
Tribbles.
please?
Sorry.
Tribbles to silent, phasers to stun.
Yep. Okay, good.
There's one sitting on the floor over there.
That's okay.
It's okay as long as it's not moving.
So we're going through each of the purpose statements in the NASA Act and asking for each of them. Well, we haven't actually really been doing the how well does NASA do this.
Right.
But we're also asking, maybe we should actually focus on the other two questions, which are, should this be changed and should it be there? And then at the end, maybe we could talk about what's missing, because there are 9 purpose statements. So the first is about the expansion of human knowledge of the Earth and phenomena in the atmosphere and space. The second is improvement of usefulness, performance, speed, safety, and efficiency of aeronautical and space vehicles. And we've suggested adding to that cost effectiveness. And we also pointed out that usefulness is, kind of begs the question of usefulness for whom and by what measure. And we're on number 3, which is development and operation of vehicles capable of carrying instrument, equipment, supplies, and living organisms through space. And we've suggested that maybe should be changed to the funding and, where appropriate, the development and operation of the same. So that's where we are now. We were just talking about the fact that this might not be clear enough to specify that it includes all permanent facilities in space. Can you turn off your tribble, please?
No, there it is. It's behind. Oh, no, it's in the bag.
So, any other comments on that one? So I'm doing a track changes version here, which I'm going to publish when we're done. I mean, do we think it matters that it's vehicles carrying these things through space? Does that need to specify permanent destinations?
I think it needs to, I think it needs to at least indicate that, no. I would like to somehow create a distinction between vehicles into space, meaning LEO, and vehicles in space, meaning BEF.
Right, and right now it's through space.
Right, but that's ambiguous enough.
There's a third ambiguity here, which is like, what do we consider a moon base? That's not technically. You can argue that that's not a vehicle per se. And actually, I'm starting to agree with what you were saying there, Baron, earlier about.
Yeah, I mean, NASA Goddard is a vehicle in some sense, right?
So.
That is, we're all on Spaceship Earth, and that's, one
Yeah.
small
So
component of Spaceship Earth.
I think actually the better way to do it is the development and operation of systems
And structures.
and structures. I can go with that. Carrying instruments, equipment, supplies, blah 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 blah.
How about vehicles, systems, and structures?
Okay.
How about carrying through and in space?
Well, I was going to say carrying instruments, equipment, supplies, and living
In
organisms
space.
in space.
So we just replace through with in.
Yeah.
How about in and into? Or in and to? Into and through?
No, you're making it too difficult.
So just in?
I would say
In? Okay. So this currently reads the funding and, where appropriate, the development and operation of vehicles, systems, and structures capable of carrying instruments, equipment, supplies, and living organisms in space.
I would have funding sources to open it up to all other possibilities.
Say again?
Funding sources. You can not necessarily rely on the government.
Well, this is NASA's purposes. So these are the things that NASA is supposed to do. So that's actually the whole point we're trying to raise here, is that there might be other groups that would develop and operate.
Actually,
It's a similar point.
I was actually going to go back. I had a better suggestion. Instead of to space, among the cosmos.
No, that's, for them that sounds too flippant.
Yeah.
I think it.
Do we want to add tribbles to the list here? Instruments, tribbles, equipment, supplies, and living organisms?
I don't think among the cosmos is flippant. I think it sounds cool, but
It's Sagan-esque.
But we're going to be talking to bureaucrats and politicians. The more you sound flippant or...
yeah, and I'm one of them.
yeah, I understand. Yes, but there's all types of in this town.
The real problem is the cosmos includes the surface of the Earth, and we want to make it clear that they can't move stuff around the Earth and do their mission.
Yeah, I mean, clearly pushing paper from one side of a NASA desk to another is in some sense moving supplies in space.
You are
in the
looking
cosmos.
at aeronautics.
In the cosmos. Okay, we have 9 of these to go through,
Yes.
so let's just keep going. The fourth is the establishment of long-range studies of the potential benefits to be gained from, the opportunities for, and the problems involved in the utilization of aeronautical and space activities for peaceful and scientific purposes.
I would say research.
The establishment.
Instead of studies, I would say research. The studies can mean anything in DC. In a bureaucratic sense.
Long range studies of potential benefits of research. Yeah, good.
Yeah, I mean,
Check.
that seems pretty
Not
uncontroversial.
a question, right?
So, should we go on?
Yeah.
5, the preservation of the role of the U.S. as a leader in aeronautical and space science and technology, and in the application thereof to the conduct of peaceful activities within and outside the atmosphere.
Fine. I don't think that's.
But do international space companies count as U.S. superiority?
not superiority.
No, this is about
leadership.
Oh, leadership.
No, well, this is about the preservation of the role of the U.S. as a leader. This doesn't specify that it's the U.S. public or private sector.
The issue is NASA has a role to play in the preservation. That's what it's
Right.
saying. Whatever that role is.
And we can come back to these. I mean, it may make more sense to come back to them after we've
Even
gone
the
through.
space environment. I'm not using the word something like space environments. We can say more into it.
It's dealing with leadership in aeronautical and space sciences and technologies.
Well, I actually understand his argument was you could make the argument of if we have you have a system in space and it's not just we don't want to just have the best technology for it. We actually want to be the best when it comes to space. Having systems in place, having the vehicles in place, and I'm not specifying how you do that necessarily, but I think there's a point of view that there's it's not just all the it's science and technology, but it's across the.
Well, let me maybe piggyback off that to say that the purpose here is leadership in science and technology and the application thereof.
Okay,
All right, so that's what it said.
one part of the sentence.
Well, hold on.
You want leadership. You also want leadership in space technology and business.
Well, hold on, that's what I was getting at. So right now this is leadership in science, technology, and the application thereof. And what I'm saying is the application thereof is kind of vague. I think that's the point you're making. And that can include other things, like business.
Yes, like space environment would be condensing it down. You can have an environment, you can throw in a whole lot of things, but they have to interrelate with each other. Otherwise you don't have an environment.
Well, see, I would say what you're talking about there is the utilization of the space environment.
Right. Well,
No,
that's.
Yes, I agree with it. But I don't want to say that because we might run into some political problems because of the space treaty. People might think we're trying to.
We're already using space, though.
I know that, but
we're not going to run into that.
Well, let's just go through these other four. So the next this is number 6. The making, and I know this is difficult because you don't have it in front of you, and I'm sorry we don't have a projector. But the making available to agencies.
Do we want to? I'm just saying. Do we want to? Like, I can move over there.
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
So everybody can see. Yeah, why don't we do that? And then everybody can kind of look off as best as possible.
Making available to agencies directly concerned with national defense of discoveries that have military value or significance, and the furnishing by such agencies to the civilian agency established to direct and control non-military aeronautical and space activities, i.e. NASA, of information as to discoveries which have value or significance to that agency. That's a mouthful. So to repeat, it's basically to share discoveries that have military value or significance from the national security agencies to NASA. That's essentially what that says.
Well, NASA gets more, so sure.
Yeah.
Why not?
I don't. That seems uncontroversial. Right. 7, cooperation by the U.S. with other nations and groups of nations in work done pursuant to this act and in the peaceful application of the results thereof.
Well, I really do want to see a American and European-led Europa mission. I think that's on the planning board, so yeah, that's a good one.
Well, that's one application of the general point.
That's right. Work with them, play well with others in the world.
Because you get more funding for certain projects, so yeah, it's fine.
Right. So, and let's come back to this at the end because the question here, these are all begging the questions of what it's really supposed to be for, right?
True. It is big.
8, the most effective utilization of the scientific and engineering resources of the U.S. with close cooperation among all interested agencies of the U.S. in order to avoid unnecessary duplication of effort, facilities, and equipment.
Think about the effective part. I'm not saying I have a suggestion yet, but think about what does it mean to be effective? Is it effectiveness in terms of accomplishing a particular goal? Or is it effectiveness in terms of getting best value for the money? Or is it some other kind? What's the measure of effectiveness that you were thinking of?
Or is it employing the maximum number of people in the right congressional districts?
Right.
So we have 2 things flagged right now. And on number 2, improvement of the usefulness of vehicles. We flag usefulness as being
too vague.
Too vague, and here effective also sort of same question. Why don't we come back to both of those when we're done? Because we're now on 9. The preservation of the U.S. Preeminent position in aeronautics and space through research and technology development related to associated manufacturing processes.
How's that? Does that overlap, or does that somehow work with one of the previous ones, the leadership one?
The other one was about science and technology and applications. This one is on manufacturing specifically.
How about private and commercial? Which would cover just about everything.
Well, that's...
Would it be possible to combine the two into a single statement, or?
I think there's a way to do it. I do think there's a way to do it.
So historically, I'd have to go back and look at it. I think that was actually added recently, and that's why it's at the end.
It was.
So instead of adding manufacturing to the other one, they just had a separate.
Why do we limit it only to manufacturing? for other methods,
Because there's
commercial
significant,
methods. I
because
understand
there's
that
significant
commercial
economic
use.
impact.
There's a lot of uses, but there are also potentially other markets where that can be taken advantage of, not just manufacturing.
Well, but
Manufacturing research.
if you want to you can argue if you argue that the relevant point, if you're looking at it from a purely hard power issue, there's a clear total justification for the government to play a role in distorting the marketplace in this. If you
Well, it always does. We're getting into economics. They always distort it. But
what you're going to, the point is that this is a clear, because this relates to manufacturing of potential weapons technology in terms of in terms of like satellite, spy sats and those
Is that
kinds of
an
things.
ATK?
I'm not necessarily agreeing with this. I'm just
Is that what that is?
making
Well,
the
figure a way how to
Is
say
that
it.
an ATK clause?
I'm just making the argument for this.
And that's why it's.
I'm not arguing against it. I'm worried about the wording.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So those are the 9 specific
Clause from
statements.
you,
And let me back up, and I sort of pulled a fast one here because the way that this is actually written, these are the 9 things that hang under Section D of the purpose statements, which reads, the aeronautical and space activities of the U.S. should be conducted so as to materially contribute to one or more of the following objectives. So these are all specific objectives, but there is preliminary language that's more general than that. And basically, to summarize, it's first and foremost devoted to peaceful purposes for the benefit of all mankind. Second, civilian agency, doesn't really say much. And then third, and this is the one that Aaron put his finger on earlier, that NASA is to seek and encourage to the maximum extent possible fullest commercial use of space. And then you get to these 9 purposes, right? So basically the first ones are kind of like what in general NASA is supposed to do. It doesn't give you a lot of context. The commercial one says you're supposed to use commercial. And then you get into these 9 specific statements. And then there are a few other things after that about research and propulsion systems and relating to energy conservation and environmental degradation, bioengineering related to disability, which is very specific. And then finally, there is one in here about detecting, tracking, cataloging, and characterizing NEOs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what NASA is supposed to do in a nutshell. So we have 25 minutes left. What would you all find most helpful to unpack?
I would say one problem I have with this and what NASA's doing now is right now there's, I'm pushing space solar power, and NASA says that DOE should deal with it, and DOE says NASA should deal with it. Some agency in the government should deal with space solar power.
Here brings up
And maybe that needs to be added to this. That maybe energy should specifically be added here.
Yeah.
Anyways, I feel a bit dehydrated. I'll be right back.
I mean, here it brings up a little point with me. NASA could reorganize administratively NASA to perform also the duties of a Quango.
And it's a quasi-autonomous, non-governmental organization.
Because there's some functions, most of us know the transportation in the cities. The cities need them to get people around, even if they're not profit-making. But by having a Quango, you can bridge the public and the private sectors and the national interest, if you will. You can bridge those two, and while you have different administrations, you can get to more details.
Okay, so that's how's NASA set up. That's not a purpose statement.
I know, but
Okay, but
that's
let's
kind of
hold
the
on.
question I'm asking.
Okay, but we're talking here about purpose statements, so let's go back to the energy one. Because right now, that there are things like that already in here. Like as I mentioned, promoting the development of energy systems and NEO research. So what I hear is a suggestion that there should be some specific purpose statement here about.
Does it say specifically energy in here?
It says does say,
No.
no, it does,
Okay,
Let me suggest that the broader point of what's missing here is not actually about space energy, it's about space resources, which would include space energy. I mean, you could write one of the things that's, from my perspective, the two things that are missing here, most importantly, are one, a sense of the ultimate goal, which has got to be, in some wording, it has to be settlement, and two is the use of space resources.
yeah, I think we should add energy to the resource. I like where you're going.
Oh, yeah,
I think
energy including resources.
I think we definitely need to specify energy.
And we can do that
Because
as an
you know,
EG.
sunlight really could be not considered a resource, so you don't want to give them any wiggle room.
Yeah, well, you could call that out in particular.
Yeah,
Energy, manufacturing, et cetera, that we had
Yeah.
similar to that.
but I really like where you're going with that.
So, how would you, do you want to do the resources one first, then we can go back to the settlement one?
I think we should just add one where you talk about resources and settlement and development and energy all in the same.
would you, question Baron, if I can jump in real
Yeah.
quick. Are you thinking about this under the section D part with all the nine points, or in the larger section, in the larger, A through whatever it is, in that framework for utilization and colonization?
I'm not sure, it can go in either place.
How about using settlement for developing space resources? Because there's a whole.
Well, they're two different goals, right? And actually, in my mind, personally, they should be on. They're interrelated, but they should be on the same level.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of a chicken and egg thing.
No,
You
but
don't have space
there's
settlement, you don't get space development,
Right.
Resource development.
If you have settlement, you're presumably you must also have utilization of space resources, but you can have space resource utilization without space
Yeah, but
settlement.
We already are doing that.
That's-
Space solar power
Yeah,
without settlement is an example of using
Well, we already have-
space resources without
We
settlement.
already have that.
we're already, I mean, that, space solar power
So
is
I
just
think that's
scaling
separate.
up communication satellites, so I don't think there's really any fundamental difference in some
We might-
ways between space solar power and communication satellites. So
Um,
I don't think in terms of using space resources that space solar power really counts. I mean, it's not fundamentally different
But
than
if-
communication satellites.
But if your goal is to find political support for space solar power, then one way to do that is to have in a charter, say, utilization of space resources, and then make the argument, get that accepted, and then make the argument that space solar power is in fact utilization of in-space resources, namely solar power, to solve an energy dependency
Right.
problem on Earth.
Right.
That becomes a much simpler argument. If the utilization of resources, regardless of settlement, is already in the charter.
Yeah.
Right?
So, again, do you care where this goes, or whether they're separate?
We also,
I think they can be separate, and I'll leave it to you to figure out whether it should be separate.
I think as long as they're all in there.
Well, what I would suggest is, so just starting from the top, so before you get to those 9 purposes, or they're specifically called objectives, before you get there, you have 3 statements. One is general provision for dealing with this. It doesn't really say anything, but it's after the peaceful purposes. Second is civilian agency. Third is commercial, and then the fourth is objectives. So it seems to me if you want rhetorically to do this in the most powerful way, you would do it before you get to the point about using commercial services. You would first say what is the main objective.
Yeah, I think you're right. That would be a good place for it.
That's where you're putting the settlement and resource utilization?
Resource, yeah.
You're putting it under the objectives.
No, before that. So up here, So you go A, B, and then you'd have a new C.
Okay,
And then you'd have the part about using commercial, and then you'd have a list of objectives.
okay.
Yeah, but I'm kind of worried, when the people see the word settlement, they'll either equate colonization or commercial with the settlement, and we have a whole different argument which we've been having for years.
So what would you suggest saying?
I would say settling, something like settling and developing space resources.
So not settlement.
You're doing,
But you have to, I want to link the two of them.
Maybe put a permanent human presence.
well, actually,
Because I'm thinking development. And when you're dealing with the government, there's a whole industry for that. We're trying, one small way, we're trying to get out of an economy. Our economy today, and that's development. It's also the third world when it comes to development. So I want to put the word settling, and if you're going to bring the two together, settlement and developing resources together, so you can get one of the bigger arguments against this out of the way.
actually,
There's a lot of people, especially in the liberal. I don't want to politics here. Liberals just don't equate space as necessary.
some of us disagree. Actually, I would disagree with that.
That's what some of the liberals.
I would say not as many
The
as you
ones
think.
I run across.
Okay.
We'll have that discussion.
Let's not go there.
So,
You know,
so Sagan, what do you have, Baron, so far? Let's start with that.
U.S. declares the general welfare of the United States is again, that's the general setup for all these initial statements, or requires. Well, actually, what we could say here, this sort of gets back to the point that was raised earlier, which is about the leadership point, right? This is about long-term U.S. leadership, right, as well as other best interests. So maybe you could call that here, although I haven't done that yet. But you could say maximum utilization of space resources, including new energy sources, metals, and minerals, or new sources of energy, metals, and minerals.
I would change.
I would just say sources of energy, because solar power could be considered not a new source.
Okay, and energy sources, metals, and minerals.
See, is it worthwhile to consider putting something there about soft resources versus hard resources? Hard resources being energy, minerals, and the like. Soft resources being something like the zero-G environment. The height.
The things you can only do in space.
Well, the things you can only do in space, but you can't actually move it.
Like orbital slots.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think what we need, they're using we're getting the soft resources, we're not getting the hard resources.
No, we're not getting all the soft resources.
We're getting some of the soft resources.
We're getting more soft resources than we are hard resources. I'll agree on that. But there's a lot of soft resources we're not getting right now.
Mm-hmm.
So can you think of a way to encapsulate that succinctly?
fluid or static resources?
Well, I would say physical resources and location resources. And physical resources are we can include in there a definition of things like mineral, energy, and so forth, and location resources.
Well, let's not get bogged down in this. We don't have a lot of time. Let's come back to that. But I think we're in agreement that we need to specify both of them, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So and for right now we're going to call them like hard and soft or physical and.
Yeah, hard and soft is the slang I've been using. So.
Okay, and examples of that, if we wanted to call them out, would include energy sources, metals, minerals, orbital slots, zero-G.
Well, the soft resources is zero-G and location and height location. It's orbital slots. Those are the soft resources. You can extend that ultimately into industry creation as part of those soft resources. But I think that goes down a path.
But let's figure out how to write the sentence. So maximum utilization of space resources, including hard and soft, right? And then what do we want to say about connecting that to permanent settlement and making the point that they're inseparable? See,
I was looking at this. I was looking at a second ago when you were talking about it, and it almost seems to me that the way to do this is to have this part be before the 9 objectives.
Yeah, that's
what I have.
We're putting it here.
Yeah. Well, let me. You have the resource utilization before the 9 objectives, and then you have the settlement part after the 9 objectives, as kind of a general declarative saying it is the fundament, something along the lines of, it is the fundamental policy of the United States that the purpose of the objectives and of the resource utilization and the commercialization is to encourage the development of an off-planet civilization.
How about human and resource settlement?
Well,
I'm trying to keep it simple. I'm trying to keep it simple.
Well,
Sure.
resource settlement, I understand what you mean, but I don't think that's clear to most people. But what I hear you saying, Aaron, is that you would start off the purposes section, or somewhere on the objective section, the list of 9,
yeah.
by adding one that would say that something like some variant of the permanent.
Because there's the whole sections of like NEOs and energy, petroleum, and those kind of stuff. I would have it be right under that 9 objective before then.
Right.
Maybe it should be the extension of human civilization off the Earth as opposed to development of a
I like that.
separate.
That's fine, yeah. I can go
like it
ahead.
too, but what they're gonna,
Hmm?
I like it too, but it's been used in the past against us, against the movement, because we're just into colonization.
The others are into going back to caves and,
Yeah, well,
reducing our lifestyle.
How about the extension of human civilization across the solar system?
I
Yeah,
wouldn't
that's
stop
better.
at the solar system.
Across the
Off
cosmos.
Earth. Bang.
yeah.
Yep.
Beyond the Earth.
Yeah.
Beyond Earth.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great idea kind of thing, but I just got done reading like Team Arrivals. Getting rid of slavery was a good idea, but Lincoln chose the time to introduce it when he knew he could get, Congress behind him. Just because it's a good idea, it wasn't the right time to do. You know what I'm saying? It might be too soon.
Well. So let's suppose for a second it is too soon.
Yeah.
Is there a more oblique way to do that? Like, for example, simply saying lowering launch costs.
Yeah, but that would be, we could do it in later, but that would be one specific goal, as opposed to that original statement.
Yeah, but this is a list of objectives, right? So
Yeah,
that's
on
a
the
pretty.
bottom, during the other part of the list, I thought we were still on the heading part of it.
Well, we moved from.
The purpose, which was the whys, to the objectives, to which is the whats. Right?
Right.
Yeah, but that's a happy lip, so to speak, should be in there.
Well,
I'm just being general.
no, well, launch costs as a more general statement.
Well, I can cut the launch of this room can cut the launch costs, but sometimes there are better ways through partnerships. This is one example where you can lower launch costs.
Right, but this is an objective, right? So the purpose is not to specify how. But so we got at this earlier when we were talking about. Right now, the Act already says that NASA is supposed to improve the usefulness, performance, speed, safety, and efficiency of vehicles, and we talked about throwing in cost effectiveness.
Market it.
That could be a place to put that in, or it could simply be a separate statement.
How about the word market? Making it market, having access to the market. Not phrasing it right.
Okay, well, Ken, do you think this is better as a separate statement or as part of that general
Well, again,
statement?
and I jumped in at the, how to include settlement or off-Earth, long-term, presence kind of thing, and maybe as the long-term goal, which I guess is that would be maybe stick it as a purpose and not as an objective. I don't know. The right place
Well, to your point, Ken, I would say that the abolitionists were around for a long time before Lincoln tried to abolish slavery or started the Civil War, and then after the war abolished slavery. But
they wanted him to act immediately to end slavery. He had that Emancipation Proclamation sitting in his back pocket for months before he pulled it out. Yeah, and so it's part of his existence was keeping them at bay, even though he knew they were right. He couldn't say yes to them because it was political suicide, and that's the same thing here.
Okay, well,
my point is that the abolitionists were around for a long time before the Civil War, and so putting in here that the goal is off-Earth settlement, I don't think is basically starting the Civil War.
Right. Well,
no, what he's trying to say is having the time for him to politically implement it, not whether he's right or wrong. And you want to have something. I don't think you're
going to make it a specific objective right away, but I think setting the groundwork for it in the purpose section. I don't know.
I think we need to state that's the goal. I really do. I think that NASA's been around for 50, for
50
decades,
years.
50 years now, and hasn't moved us towards settlement. It doesn't think that's important to them. And I think we need to make it clear that's important to us.
He already had the good idea of moving human civilization out into space. That's a safer way to say, politically speaking,
Yeah,
a safer way
because,
to.
there's going to be a fairly sizable portion of the new space community that's going to say, we don't want NASA to be doing so. We want to
yes,
do
they
it
do.
ourselves. Now, I didn't say you did.
No,
I said there's going to be a significant portion of the
I
new
know what they're
space
going to say.
movement.
That's a typical business. Their
Okay.
lawyers are going to say, do this.
Let's not argue about what other people might think. 'Cause that's
Yeah.
irrelevant.
That's fine.
But your point.
We are kind of, though. We're trying to come up with verbiology that will
No.
be effective.
Well, well, to some extent, what we're talking about is whether people, what we think, what we could agree on. And all I'm saying is that what other people who aren't in this room might or might not think is not worth spending time on.
That's fine.
Okay. So, if you were to put in something here on cheap access to space, what would you say? The maximum?
Right,
To create market accessibility.
That's too vague. I mean, how about cheap?
Cheap, reliable. Correct.
How about the maximum affordability and reliability of access to space?
Yeah.
Are we? I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Are we back to talking about objective one? Or
Yeah,
one
this
of the-
this really doesn't work without a projector. I'm sorry. This is just, it's too hard for people to keep this in their heads. I mean, I'm happy to pass this around,
Take too long.
but let me just walk you through. I'll make this as big as I can and walk you through what I've done before we break.
I would say, I think that the maximum affordability flies in the face of what the Senate is trying to do by maintaining ATK and.
Industrial base.
Yeah, the industrial base, especially
no.
the reliability.
No, the House is worse.
Yeah, but
The-
The House is worse.
No, I think the Senate, well, the House is bad, but the Senate is worse. The
No.
Senate will throw $10 billion down the toilet.
No,
Let's,
the House is throwing.
Guys, let's
Yeah.
finish with that.
Let's see how big I can get this. Anyway, so what I suggested was simply, again, I don't know how
Yeah,
many of you can
say
see
it.
this, but
Just say it.
so adding as a purpose statement, Congress declares the general welfare of the U.S. requires maximum utilization of space resources, and then including physical and hard resources to be figured out later, and I'm happy to talk to you about that. And then 2 additional purpose statements or objective statements. So the first objective statement, the one that's already there, is expansion of human knowledge of the Earth, blah, blah, blah. So in some ways it would be symmetrical to say the expansion of human civilization beyond the Earth, right? There's a nice little parallelism there. And then the existing improvements of usefulness, performance, speed, etc., to be followed by the maximum affordability and reliability of access to space. And then the other change we suggested was that where it currently says the development and operation of space vehicles, we changed that to the funding and, where appropriate, development and operation, and not only of vehicles, but also systems and structures. And we had no other changes, although we did flag effectiveness and usefulness as being things that might require further definition. Anybody else want to add anything?
maybe I'm really being nitpicking here, but say human expansion into space. Or safe human
Expansion of
civilization.
human civilization?
Yeah, this safe expansion of human civilization.
I think it's nitpicky.
I know I'm nitpicking, but
Okay.
I wouldn't. That brings in, that opens up so much more.
Anyone else?
I wouldn't.
All right, well, I will, I'll put this up and tweet about the link, so if you want to see it, can do so.
That's good, thank you very much.
So what's next?
Carrie Ann?
What's the next session
I
here?
don't honestly know. I'm
Next
sorry.
section.
Yeah.
Okay, this was the open space movement and Copenhagen suborbitals, in case anybody's interested.
There you are.